Hey, I'm Victor Lucas. I work for the Electric Playground. That's my very fun day job, but my really cool night job is to come to VFS and work on the Insider series and talk with all kinds of incredible creators. And we've got one for you today. I have got the Eisner Award-winning Paul Jenkins joining me today, and we're going to find out all about him and what it takes to be a creative juggernaut. Please welcome Paul Jenkins. Hello, my friend.
Hey,
good to see you. Good to see you. Now, Paul Jenkins speaks with a British accent, but he lives in Atlanta. And we're going to find out exactly what got him on this long journey to Atlanta. He's worked in Vancouver many times. He's worked in Hollywood many times. But Paul Jenkins, it is a privilege to have you here, sir. And this is something that I've been wanting to do ever since VFS approached me about the idea of doing these kinds of things on a regular basis. You were one of the first people that popped into my head because you have such an interesting career, such an interesting background. It all started, though, in comic books, I think, with the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that's right. First of all, thanks for having me here. I came to the United States when I was very young. I was 20 years old. I had studied to be an actor. And I went to Massachusetts. I was chasing a girl. You know, I'm not sure she was that into it, but it was great. And I met a couple of guys that had a black and white comic book. And they had just sold the rights to do a TV show and a toy.
Right. And
I said, you know, you guys seem pretty busy. I was actually trying to be a musician at the time. How about I come and help you out? And they had a couple of people working in the office. One guy did licensing, another lady was the office manager.
That's amazing.
And so we here in this tiny place in Northampton, a little hole in the wall, 12 by 12 feet.
And so that's Peter Laird and Kevin Eastman.
Yeah.
And did you know Fred Fierce by any chance?
I did know Fred Fierce.
Because he ended up becoming our lawyer for Electric Playground down the road, and he's an incredible guy. And I'm just sort of snapping into all of this. This was in Northampton in Massachusetts. So you wanted to be an actor. Did you know that was not the best place in the world to go to be an actor, Northampton, Massachusetts?
Well, you know, you are always driven as a guy when you're chasing girls. You're going in the wrong direction, you know.
But you just happened to fall in with these guys that were going to create this massively successful property. Did you have any idea when you were editing those comics that the Turtles were going to be what they are today?
We knew the TV show was working out, and the toy creation was so vibrant at that point. We literally would have ideas, send them off to Playmates, and they would make a toy within 2 months, and it would be on TV. We were trying to think, Bebop and Rocksteady and all these characters for the Ninja Turtles were literally just created out of Mirage Studios.
Amazing.
A group of artists that would help create all of this stuff. We knew we were somewhat successful, but then we started working on the first film. And when that came out, the world exploded, and we just couldn't believe it. You would go to movie theaters and see children lined around the block for weeks. It was the most unbelievable phenomenon. We had, I think it grossed 167 million domestically, $250 million worldwide. Then it got reissued on VHS, just at the time when it all went to DVD.
Sure, yeah.
So they got the DVD reissued, then the pay-per-view, so they just kept getting these whammies on these films.
That's amazing. And so, but it sounds almost like you were like punk rock, sort of like a rock band, like a garage band that blew up in a way, right?
Yeah, we were. It was really interesting. I mean, I remember being on set one time with Vanilla Ice.
What a weird story you got.
I've got so many weird stories of those days. And I was on set, and Vanilla Ice had come on set and had immediately alienated every girl on the entire place.
Sure he did, yeah.
This is at Carroll Co. in North Carolina. And we were on and doing the Go Ninja Go song.
Yeah.
Moving the crowd, first AD's yelling at everybody. He would drive around the set with a little remote-controlled car on a golf cart, wouldn't talk to anybody. He was just, it was hilarious. And I remember standing there, we were working with the Henson people, you know, Jim died on our first movie, unfortunately he passed away.
Oh, wow.
So we had all of these crazy experiences. I even had a crazy experience in the worldwide premiere in London of the first movie. We went to Leicester Square Odeon, and I'm not really an awards guy, and I'm not really a red carpet guy.
Yeah.
So in those days, a lot of my friends in the Ninja Turtles had what we might call statuesque girlfriends, usually usually of the exotic dancer variety.
Right. Because you were kids, right?
That's
like
right.
How old were you guys?
23.
That's amazing.
And I mean, by the time I was 23, we went off and did Tundra. I was the director of a publishing company. It was crazy.
Wild.
But so I didn't have a date.
Yeah.
I didn't really care for the red carpet, so I took my nan. I took my grandmother.
Oh my God.
And
that's so sweet.
So we drove up in the red carpet. And my nan was all excited because because the limo driver had come to take her, and all the old ladies were peeking out the window, like, "What's Mrs. Eldridge doing?"
She's going to see the Ninja Turtles.
She's going to see the Ninja Turtles. So I take my little nan. We get up, we walk out of the door, and she starts waving, "Hello, everyone." It was great. So all these flashbulbs going off. We had a party afterwards, and there was like Elton John was there, Brian May from Queen was there.
Yeah.
There were all these people, and literally Brian May came over, and he was like, "Young man, this is the greatest thing I've ever seen. I'm taking my mum to the next premiere." Like, all of these people were doting on my grandmother.
Oh, that's
so of my career, it's like one of my favorite memories of just not being one of the crowd, but taking my nan.
Well, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
And I guess, I mean, you're 23, but you had to have a sense of maturity and a sense of your place in the world. You must have learned a tremendous amount being an editor, working with these guys and watching this, thing go from nothing to everything like that.
Yeah, I think if you're young, you are put into that kind of position sometimes, not to that extent. Maybe you will either sink or swim. You're either going to explode, and you won't be able to handle it, or you can, and I could handle it, and I was okay with it. It didn't bother me.
So why leave? Why did you want to, because you took all of that success and you basically created a brand new career for yourself.
After a while, I was at Tundra Publishing, and that was owned by Kevin Eastman, one of the two.
Yep. Who now owns Heavy Metal Magazine, I believe.
He owned a Heavy Metal Magazine.
Yeah.
There was a time I saw the money coming in for Ninja Turtles, and it wasn't for me. I could see how it was changing people's behavior.
Right.
And I had a conversation with Kevin one day, and I said to him, I don't want you to give me this big bonus you're trying to give everybody. I think everything that I see from this is that the money changes your relationships with your friends, and I want to be your friend for the rest of our lives. So you've got to make a choice now. Give me a ton of money that came in from the Ninja Turtles, or remain friends. And even to this day, I mean, I literally just spoke to him 2 days ago.
That's awesome.
I sang at his wedding when he got remarried.
He's a good dude.
He's a good guy.
I've had him on our show a lot, and he's a really cool, accessible dude. And
great guy.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's super cool. So you learned a lot from all of that, and you went into comics publishing. You decided acting, you're going to take a rest on that for a while. You're going to be a comic writer and publisher and editor. And
I ended up editing the original series of Big Numbers. I had Bill Sienkiewicz. I edited Alan Moore 3 or 4 times. I had Neil Gaiman. And
was this a tactic of yours to work with the best and learn from them, and then parlay that into your own work?
No, I just happened to work with the best.
Yeah, I guess.
And I had this experience with Alan because I really enjoyed Alan's my discussions with him. He was very cool about things. I learned how to be a good editor because I learned when not to edit. You don't need to edit that much with Alan Moore.
Yeah.
But I would have an opinion sometimes, and it would be great.
Yeah.
I would listen to it. And I realized after reading these scripts that I felt that I could do this.
Yeah.
I felt that I could be a writer. And I wasn't trained to be a writer.
Yeah. But you took your life experience and now this new business experience and this editorial experience. Who did you go to first? Who did you go and talk to and say, I'm ready to write my own book?
So I broke in as a writer the only way that you cannot break in. I went down to San Diego Comic-Con, and I heard that they were looking for a new writer for Hellblazer, which is really within our business of comics, one of the most prestigious kind of books.
Yeah.
And I met the editor of Hellblazer, Lou Stathis, and I said, I understand you're looking for a new writer. And he said, what have you written? And I said, I've never written anything in my life.
Oh my God.
And they let me try out for it. He and Karen Berger, and 6 weeks later they called me up and said, congratulations, you're the new writer of Hellblazer. And I thought, that's what I wanted. Like, great.
That's amazing.
I had no idea of what I was doing. You know?
That's amazing. What Comic-Con was that?
93 or 94.
How many? Was that your first one?
No, I had been a few years before with Ninja Turtles and all that kind of stuff, yeah.
I want you to, because I don't know how many people in the audience have done the San Diego Comic-Con trip. There are cons now everywhere,
yeah.
and which is fantastic. You know, it makes the accessibility with these creators a lot easier for people. They can get in touch with them. But San Diego Comic-Con has been this beacon of that for so long. And I want you to kind of give us a sense of what Paul Jenkins' trip to San Diego Comic-Con has been over the years.
Well, I once pulled a writer off of Neil Gaiman because he was trying to attack him.
Wow.
I remember the year before I got my job on Hellblazer, DC rented out the San Diego Zoo for a party.
Yeah.
So in the early 90s, this thing was crazy. And being in those days, you know, I was an editor, so I didn't have this experience of having fans interested in what I did.
Yeah.
I was not really known for anything. And then over time, you know, the comic industry goes up and down, and I was primarily known for comics. And the industry went down into bankruptcy. So I think that San Diego Comic-Con kind of reflected that to some extent through the mid-90s, near to the end. Mm-hmm. And then it took off. Yeah. So by the time I wrote The Origin of Wolverine, I've actually had two experiences, I kid you not, that were probably what the Beatles went through on a daily basis. I've literally had people tear my clothes, and I thought that was unbelievable.
As a comics writer?
Yeah, as a writer of comics, you know. It's probably because of this face and this body.
I didn't want to say, but you're making me all uncomfortable.
Yeah, I understand. It happens a lot. It was just an amazing experience. I mean, I had this funny experience with George Pratt and Dave McKean, who are amazing, famous comic book artists that I had edited years before. And I saw them after I wrote The Origin of Wolverine, and this was at the height of sort of popularity. And we just wanted to catch up. And they had to sit and guard the end of a hallway so that we could all just have a drink together and catch up. And I said, isn't it funny, you know, like years before I was just your editor and like helping you guys out. And now you're literally trying to stop people from coming and getting a signature.
That's great.
Turnabout's fair play. Go get me a beer.
That's amazing. Well, I know we have a lot of students here that are, you know, learning about film writing and learning about writing in general, creativity in general. I want to kind of drill down a little bit into the disciplines here. What makes a good editor from the experiences that you've had? What's a good editor and somebody that, you know, would aspire to become an editor should learn some of these traits, but also if you're a writer working with an editor, you should be on the lookout for these traits as well.
Well, I think, first of all, what I said holds really true. A good editor knows when not to edit. Trust the talent, help them, nurture them. Do not say, I don't like this, without explaining why you don't like it and what a potential alternative could be.
Yeah.
Understand structure, understand language. I found myself, you know, I did study to be an actor, but I spent most of my time in film school and I spent most of my time writing, so I kind of minored in English.
Right.
And I found it incredible that, frankly, many editors that I was exposed to were not qualified in English language and hadn't been through this process and didn't understand, you know, what they had done was read 1,000 comics and therefore they felt qualified, and I don't think that's a qualification.
And wouldn't you say that in almost any career, creativity for sure, but almost any career, that sort of minoring in English and that affinity for the language and learning how to communicate with people is so paramount and so important. And especially if you're thinking about becoming an actor or a director or something like that, you should really learn how to, you know, say the words and communicate the words and write the words. It's an important skill.
The word is communication.
Yeah.
You know, what do we do as writers? We communicate. What do we do as actors? We communicate.
Yeah.
And so if we are unable to communicate in the profession of communication, we're failing.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important that editors understand how to communicate ideas and how to listen to ideas and help people communicate them.
So working as an editor, do you think that helped you become a better comic writer and sort of coming up with stories and making your editors and your bosses at the publishers happier?
Even better, perhaps.
Yeah.
Even better than that. I was a publisher. I was a head of licensing for a while.
Yeah.
all of those things helped me to become a better writer because I understood the end product, I understood its distribution.
Right.
I learned the sort of producing side of it, and then went in as a freelance creator, and I think that's incredibly valuable for me because I could communicate with publishers and I could communicate with editors,
yes,
and give them the things that I knew they were probably going to be looking for.
Well, I know a lot of people in this room want to know what makes a good writer, and what do you think editors are looking for in writers?
The first thing is this, that we could always ask the question, what is a writer? Or do you have a voice? These are interesting questions that don't really have one specific answer, do they? Everybody's answer is unique, everybody's answer is correct. But I would say that over time I've learned a few things that would help people to become writers. And one of the primary things that I sort of explain to people, there is a maxim that says that writers write. And I cry foul on that. That's not the correct thing to say. Writers don't just write, writers finish.
Right.
And so the concept of putting out what we call the vomit draft is everything. If you can wrestle this atrocious piece of work, if you can struggle your way through a screenplay and get this awful thing out on paper, that is the hardest part of being a writer. And at that point, we are now going to work.
Yeah.
You know,
that's like the editing muscle being flexed right there. Yeah.
If you're a writer professionally, you are never satisfied. If you say, I have arrived creatively, then you are correct. That's as far as you will ever go.
Right.
And that terrifies me. I want to get better and better. I want to learn every day. I want to find out things. I have this voracious appetite for knowledge. I want to understand the human condition. I'm just, we get this one go around on this planet. I'm experiencing it. I want to find out what to do. I want to think about it. I'm a dad. I have 2 children. I have a beautiful wife. I want to understand how to be a better dad, what to do with my life. And all of this comes from writing.
Right.
But it doesn't just come from the process of writing. We are judged not by what it was that we put into it. We're judged by what we finish up with. We're only judged by the finished product.
Right.
And so the other thing that I've found is most important for writers is to understand that, is to say, don't worry about the process. This is not about how did you get there. It could have been simple or it could have been the most torturous thing ever. It's what did you get to.
It's not the rules so much that you sort of adhere to or want to follow. It's what have you got to show for yourself.
Yep.
Right. I've just seen, I don't know if you're a fan of Taylor Sheridan's work, he's got a new movie called Wind River. It just hit theaters, and what struck me was the extraction of the extra dialogue not needed. Right. And just the Coen brothers are great at this as well, just taking out things where you would see in other movies. Right. Is that a big part of, like when you write a comic and you're writing panel for panel, does it kill you to just like take out dialogue because it serves the story better, or is that?
It pleases me.
Yeah,
it pleases me. Yeah.
Cool.
I learned a great lesson because I was lucky enough to work on Hellblazer with Sean Phillips, and I had written a scene that had Peredur, the Welsh, because my family's Welsh, so I got to put us in there somewhere. And we had Peredur in the story, and there was a moment where the description was he drops his shoulders, he feels sorry for himself, and he says this piece of dialogue. And I got the artwork back and I took the dialogue out and realized that what Sean had done was everything that you would ever need to know about that person's moment in time.
That's awesome.
And you could not even see his face. It was all about body language, and his face was completely in shadow.
That is awesome.
And I learned that lesson, and I thought, I need to keep following that lesson. My favorite thing to write in a panel after the description of the panel is no dialogue. Has
the relationship between writer and artist and creator and artist improved in the last 20 years or so, or 30 years or so? There's been a lot of publicity, over Bob Kane and even Stan Lee sort of taking creator credit, and then suddenly it's all shared credits and things like that now. Is it a different industry than when you entered in that regard?
I can't speak for other people's relationships, but I can tell you the one thing that really surprised me about my relationships with artists. So I very firmly believe in collaboration, and you've got to really collaborate to make a comic very well. You've got to really collaborate to make a film. You've got to...
Almost any piece of art.
Yeah, you've got to know your place within it. So if you're the director of a movie, you really have to have a vision and be able to explain it and articulate it really well. But if you think about it, you also have to collaborate. You have to ask people's opinion. You have to find out what makes it work. You have to work with actors and get some feedback. So take a comic book. One of the things that I found very natural was to always call my artists and say, this is what I'm thinking of doing. What do you like to draw? And the reason I would do it is because it takes me 15 minutes to write a page, and it takes them 1 day to draw it. And so if I was going to put them in a place that they felt uncomfortable, if I was going to give them vehicles when they don't like drawing cars, if I was going to give them crowd scenes, especially Jay Lee, I used to give him crowd scenes as a joke because I knew he wouldn't draw them. And if you find out what artists like, you will create better comics. And so most of the time when I would call artists, they would say, you're the only writer that calls us.
That's amazing.
That amazes me, that in this collaborative medium, we don't have this interactivity between writer and artist.
So there's a good note to take down if you are thinking about writing comics or doing storyboards or whatever, or writing for storyboards, is to call your artists and be friends with them. Yes.
To understand everybody else's input and creative process into the finished piece of work. We're not judged by how we do it, we're only judged by what we make.
We're going to continue on with your career and some of the lessons that you've learned through your career, but I want to sort of roll back the clock here for a second, because your history and your background is incredibly interesting. You were telling me a little bit about it in the green room, and I didn't know all of this stuff, but you started in the UK, and you started on your course in the UK. Where did you grow up in the UK?
Well, I went through what most people would probably consider to be difficulties. You know, my father left my family when I was 5, and my mother had some mental health issues that are somewhat difficult, I would imagine. And so she tried to raise my brother and I as a single mom, but she's incredibly brilliant. But in those days, women were marginalized quite often by society, especially having just gone through a divorce. So she ended up cleaning house for a farmer. And we lived in a house that had no electricity. We grew up with extreme poverty, but it did not seem as hard as it might seem in hindsight. I wouldn't want it for my children, but there's elements of it that I would absolutely want for my children, because I was lucky enough to be able to walk out of my front door and pick an apple and eat it. And so a lot of that was very much magic. I had one guy that I considered to be kind of a father figure, and he was one of the local gypsies. And I've written about him often. I actually wrote about him in Hellblazer, and I've written about this lifestyle and growing up this way in the origin of Wolverine. In Wolverine Origin, if you actually read the first couple of issues, it's about a little boy that lives at the bottom of a hill, and he has this rich kid friend who lives in the farm at the top of the hill, and the lights blaze on the hill, and he watches the lights at night where the electricity is, and he doesn't have it. And that was literally how my brother and I grew up. And yet, Tom used to take me out to, I can remember going out on a really moonlit night in the snow in the apple orchard and sitting down, and Tom said, "You be quiet and that boy will come," and we'd wait for 1 hour. And if I didn't make a sound, and all you could hear was him unscrewing the cap of his whiskey bottle, taking a sip, and then putting it back on again. And then the badger came out. And so to see a European badger is impossible. You can't see one.
Wow.
And I've had them walk around my feet. I know that swallows fly high in the summer because they're catching bugs that float up on the breeze. I know all of this gypsy stuff, and I grew up with it. And I took all of this magic that I grew up with, and I was able to put it into the stuff that I work on.
And, apart from just sort of dealing and reaching and touching nature and being a part of that, which I think more and more human beings are losing that ability and that affinity. And I think it's important because it should be a part of the creative work that is flowing out of humanity. And I think we need to find our way back to nature in as many ways as possible. But apart from that, I think you probably learn survival skills and, confidence skills that allowed you to just basically handle any situation.
I learned these survival skills because my brother he was 3 years older than me. He was a terrible bully. So I was the low man on the totem pole. I had just everybody on my ass. And I've always thought that, in Great Britain, we tell like Irish jokes, and in Ireland, they apparently tell jokes about one county.
Yeah.
And in that county, they tell jokes about one town. I've heard this before. And I wondered if in that town they tell jokes about Bob at the end of the street, and that's the guy that everybody picks on. And I felt like that guy. So I, you know, as much as there's that adversity, I didn't find that this was the case, but I think I was going to go one way or the other. I was a very intelligent kid.
Yeah.
And by luck, I chose to be creative. I chose to do sports. I put myself into every single thing. I wanted to be intelligent. I wanted to overcome, not because I felt I had a mission, but I just felt like I did not want to feel this way.
Right.
And I never wanted to feel this way again. And I have a very specific day that I walked into a barley field when I was 6 years old with my 2 little toy soldiers that I owned. And I lay on the ground playing with them. And I looked in the sky and said, I will never be like them. I won't be like the rest of them. And from that day onwards, I was always chasing knowledge and chasing sports and chasing advance. And so it's no surprise that I came over to the United States with $50 in my pocket, and I have that immigrant story. I literally arrived in the States and said, I'm not going back.
Amazing. Yeah, tell me about, I mean, I think you had the relationship as a young person working with other young people and making the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, I guess the property that sort of opened a lot of doors for you, right? I mean, it gave you a sort of jet fuel to go and have conversation anywhere that you wanted to. But it sounds like even still, because of choices that you were making, because you could have just ridden that rocket ship forever and probably retired just off of that, but you wanted to challenge yourself. Yeah. And you asked for things that just weren't being done. You did that with writing comics and publishing comics. But tell me about moving into video games, because you know, writing for video games is still relatively young. It's not that people haven't been doing it for that long. It's getting better and more robust, but you were really innovating even back working on the Hulk Ultimate Destruction. Now, you'd had some comic book experience to bring you to that table, but tell me about writing for games.
So what happened, you know, I tend to find myself with the bastard child of literature every time. It starts with comics, you know, and comics are not really seen, they're seen as dumb entertainment for dumb children. Right. So let me challenge you differently about comics. They are the oldest form of human artistic expression. Sure. If you don't believe me, go to Australia and find cave paintings by Aboriginal people that they now have estimated may be close to 60 to 100,000 years old. They know this to be true because the pictures they're drawing are of giant marsupials that haven't existed for that long. Wow. So we have been expressing ourselves artistically, but cave paintings are sequential narratives, because if you start with a bison and a guy with a spear, and then further in the cave you have the bison with a spear in it, that's sequential art. Yeah. And I firmly believe that there's so much to be done and to be said in that medium. So here came video games. I was asked to be involved in them, and I started interacting with the industry, and I could not believe that the industry itself thought we are not a valid form of art. I know. Yeah. And I couldn't believe it, and I wouldn't accept it. Yeah. So I started yelling at the industry.
at the video game industry,
At the video game industry.
Yeah, because I'm sure you felt similar kinds of things with the comics industry, right?
Yeah, especially with the American comics industry, which does not take itself seriously and loves to do self-referential crossovers and that have no consequence. I mean, let me put this to you, Vic. Here's the beginning of a story, you tell me the end. The beginning is Spider-Man is dead this month in the comics. What's the end of that story?
He's going to be rescued by Dr. Octopus.
He's coming back.
Yeah, he's coming back because they need to sell the next
issue.
So
there is no consequence to his death. Therefore, this lack of consequence diminishes our care for the medium. Yeah. And I found comics to be doing this repeatedly, and I was never a comics guy. When I wrote, I'll get to the video game point in a minute, but when I wrote The Inhumans, for example, what is very unfashionable and the fans really don't like is that I'm not a huge fan of comics. And so when they asked me, would you write The Inhumans? I said, yeah, sure, who are they? I'd never heard of them. And they sent me 2 5-page Jack Kirby stories. I said, don't send me anything else, I get it. Yeah. Black Bolt is a metaphor for the king. The alpha primitives are a metaphor for the emancipation of Black America. This is a metaphor for puberty, the children in the Terrigen mists. I've got it. Leave me alone. And so I had no reference. I just wrote this 12-issue series. They won an Eisner and said, do that again. I said, let me keep doing it with no knowledge then. Don't get me in on these crossovers.
Right.
Instead, let me write these books the way they should be. So fast forward to the video game industry. The conversations I was having were, video games cannot be stories. Video games are really just interactive play. Well, even that's hardwired into us, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, bears and cats and people play as infants. So playing is important to us as experimentation. But I thought that story was built into video games, and I was adamant about it. And technically, we couldn't make some of the things that we needed to make it an immersive film. So I said, then let's take all of our limitations and embrace them. Everything should have a fictional explanation. If we can't go in that door, let's create a fictional explanation for why.
Yes.
And this is so important in game development. Mm-hmm. And we are getting better and better, but I probably moved forward from the Hulk to the Darkness, which is really the game that I think is most emulated and the one that we stood our ground on.
Yeah, every aspiring writer in the room should check out that video game, because it really was a culmination of a lot of great craft. It was a really, really cool landmark experience.
And here's what it also was. It was a great piece of luck. Mm-hmm. So what happened was, I had written the Darkness comic book for Top Cow, and they had 49 issues, and it hadn't really worked to some extent. And they asked Dale Keown and I to do it, and within one issue, we had made it work, I think. We'd found a way to get to the core of the character. So they said, you can go to Sweden and you are your own approval on the game.
Wow. That doesn't happen.
Never happens.
That's amazing.
Complete luck, then, to be put into a situation where I can make the game that I want to make.
Yeah.
And I got to visit with Starbreeze, who had done Chronicles of Riddick.
Amazing. Yeah.
And I was lucky enough that they said, we love this. And I told them, we're going to make an immersive movie, and it's going to be a love story. So let's get the character. He's a 21-year-old mobster with demon tentacles that eviscerates people. Like, whatever, who cares?
Yeah.
But let me tell you how we can care.
Yeah.
And this is the core of what I think we did to change the way stories are told in the industry. We did, I said, it's going to be this thing that you fall in love with the girl. So this is different from a movie. We have to fall in love with her. This isn't just the main character falling in love.
Because it was all first-person interaction.
Because you do things.
Yeah.
In a movie, you say, in a horror movie, you say, don't go in there. In a video game, you think, how I'm going to have to go in there.
Yeah.
Which is a different form. And I respected that form. So what you did with Jenny was, I felt it was really important to get all of the really annoyed 13-year-old game breakers that love to shoot the friendly characters and just break the games.
Yeah.
They needed to fall in love with Jenny too. So this is what we did. You go into the environment, you walk into a house, you can't pull a gun, which was really not done then. It was a completely different environment, and they put assets only dedicated to storytelling. Right. You go in her house, you do a dialogue tree, but our dialogue tree was different. Instead of, the standard for a dialogue tree would be, I'm going to ask a question, here's 3 options that you can choose, there's your choices. In this one, the 2 options were lie to her or tell her the truth as you speak to her. So immediately we created a visceral emotional response. When you lie to her or tell her the truth, she says something like, Jackie, what did you do today? What's going on? You seem upset. And if you lie to her, you say, well, Uncle Paulie's upset. If you tell her the truth, you're like, oh, my Uncle Paulie's a mobster and he's going to kill me. But whatever happens, it takes you down to this one moment. And I knew it would take us to that moment. And at this point, she says, tell me something else. What is it that's bugging you? And you get one choice. And it says, tell her that you love her. And you press it, and your character says, nah, nothing. So you feel guilty as a player of a video game. Yes. Then, a little while later, you have to... I realized that the only way to make people fall in love with her was to do it as an achievement. Right. So people want to score points in video games. Yeah, for sure. So you have to sit on a sofa with Jenny and watch To Kill a Mockingbird.
A message to everybody that has commitment issues. That's right. Make it an achievement.
Make it an achievement. You score points for falling in love. And so you put your arm around her, and she gives you a kiss, and you watch it and very dreamily fall asleep, and you get the achievement. But what I knew that would do, was it would take our 15-year-old game breakers, and it would make them have to fall in love in order to get the thing they want. And I knew we had won because 10 minutes later in the game, Jenny's put in front of you, and your Uncle Paulie blows her brains out. And you are so angry that he did that you have a fictional justification for eviscerating every single mobster that you see with your demon arms. You want to do it. And I knew that we had won when we got a lot of reviews in.
Yeah.
And the kids would write in and say, I really miss Jenny. Yeah. And I thought you would never have cared about Jenny if we hadn't taken that effort to paint the craft. So what we found out was the game did really well, but it scored 10 out of 100 on Metacritic in gameplay and 4 out of 100 in multiplayer. Scored 95% in cinematic experience and 98% in story and characterization. Yeah. And it actually was a really successful game. Yeah. So it showed 2K Games, who were by then the publisher, and they're an awesome publisher. Yeah. It proved to them that story in games can actually make money. Yeah. And that's so, why we allowed to.
And they made a sequel, and you worked on the sequel, right, yeah. And which is incredible. And I think what everybody is starting to learn here is that Paul set out on a mission to become an actor. And have you acted yet? Yeah. Yeah? Where can people see any of your acting work?
Okay. Yeah. Let's see. I voice act from time to time. Yeah. Let's see. Where can you see my acting? I'm not going to tell you. You have to find it. Yeah. You have to find it. But I'm actually halfway a decent actor.
I bet.
Because I'm not afraid of the process.
Sure.
So I have had enough of interesting stuff happen in my life. I got a ton of stuff to pull from. Yeah. So even though I couldn't have done it when I was in my 20s, actually now I can do it.
Well, and this is what's fascinating, right? And I don't have the same story as Paul, but I set out to be an actor too, and I ended up becoming a producer and a TV host, and you know, not my dream at all, but that's kind of how this works in creativity. You just end up sort of grabbing the branch and taking it wherever it leads you.
You know what I really want to do is to be able to explain to people, I want you to be a famous musician. If you want to be a rock star, go for it. But as you go for it, learn sound design and engineering and producing and all of these things, because they are awesome too. And what you might find is that you thought you wanted to be a rock star until you got on the road and found out how hard it was. Believe me, I've done it. Yeah. Traveling around in a van with 3 other guys farting all the time is no fun. That's basically what it is. There's your glamour. But you know, if you found that sound design was the thing that you had an affinity for, and you were lucky enough to be in front of the job that you loved, you would never work another day in your life, because you don't work when you do what you love.
You're clearly a fan of creating things in lots of different directions, but you started out to be an actor, and you've touched on a whole bunch of other different jobs and different opportunities in your career. What would you say to people that are, you know, thinking they're going to be one thing and heading off into, you know, chase a professional dream in one direction?
Well, I have a unique experience because I make stuff in comics. I've, you know, had a novel published in August. I do video game, I do animation. I wrote and directed Ninja Turtles for Nickelodeon last year. Mm-hmm. I work in film and television, and so my company, Meta Studios, is geared to do an independent, a $15 million slate of independent films, then build it across media. So this building across media is very difficult, but really is what we should be doing. And what I learned from my 11-year-old boy when we were in the car, he started cackling in the back seat, and he said, Daddy, have you ever heard of The Simpsons? And I said, yeah, great. And he said, well, where's the game? And I thought, Simpsons Hit and Run, that's the one to play. Yeah. So I got him Simpsons Hit and Run from back in the day, and then I gave him some Bongo comics. He wants every medium to support the things that he found interesting.
Absolutely, yes.
We have to build and design and create and direct projects that are intended to move across media. Yeah, yeah. So that at least could be the one thing that I'm somewhat unique at, because I've had experience from television experience all the way through to game, to writing comic books, to frankly doing a little bit of consulting work on the future of storytelling. I spoke last year at FutureX Live and at Terminus about the future of storytelling. We are moving into realms of augmented reality and virtual. And my speech at FutureX Live last year was about the future of storytelling. Mm-hmm. And the way I approached it was to say, let's think about these exotic things that we do. We're going to put headgear on, and we're going to be tied in personally to the web. We'll have chips in our brains and all of that. And I want a flying car as part of this equation. And what will the future of storytelling be under those circumstances? And the answer is calm down. The future of storytelling will be the same as the past of storytelling. It is about engineering other people's emotions. It is about having yourself moved. And so you can take a pencil and draw something, or you can take a computer and create an amazing virtual reality game, but they're just tools. And so if you use these tools to create stuff that moves other people's emotions, that's when you're telling a story. And so I feel that the future for myself and for my company is really to develop across all media. Meta is actually an acronym because it stands for media, education, technology, and advancement or acceleration. So what we're trying to do is to encompass this education and bring people in to teach them how to produce across every medium. That's the future of storytelling to some extent. It's just to embrace all of these tools and learn them all and then use them to create projects that are intended to move across these different media.
Amazing. We could keep this going for about 5 more hours, I have no doubts, but this has been an unbelievable privilege. Thank you so much, Paul. We have all learned an incredible amount of information. I have no doubt that we could be talking for another 4 or 5 hours here about your thoughts and your experiences. But Paul, I have to say goodbye and say that you are welcome to come back to the Insider Series here at VFS anytime. Thank you so much, my friend.
Well, thank you. Thank you, everybody.